Hello, it's me again. Uh, I I never really considered the role that school might play in instituting and proliferating these ideas of gender difference. It's an obvious blind spot. Now looking back on it, it seems like something that I should have realized a lot sooner, especially given the fact that um, Althusser speaks a lot about how school is, in his view, the primary uh, ideological state apparatus, or ISA is the term that he uses for them. He says that under feudalism, the church functioned as the primary ISA, but under capitalism, it's the school. And it makes a lot of sense, especially now that I've reflected on it and realized how I missed this blind spot. And I definitely could see through my experience how the genders were taught differently, how boys, me, I was expected to be a bit more rambunctious, less attentive, and the girls were seen to or expected to be more quiet and more studious. I believe those expectations also did have an effect on me. I've been diagnosed with ADHD. I was not diagnosed until I was 29 years old. And it should have been obvious. I would do well on tests and in the classroom environment. As long as things were fairly engaging, I would stay engaged. But outside, when it came to homework, I struggled heavily with the inability to pay attention for long periods of time. And because of the intersection of class with gender, these expectations and everything, I was not ever taken to a therapist. It was something that my family just didn't have money for. There was more stigma around it, but it was primarily financial, I would think. My stepmother, her son, who was a year older than me, well, 6 months older than me, he was taken to a therapist, diagnosed at a young age, medicated for it, and it's a different experience. I'm prescribed medication for my ADHD, but I don't take it that often. I feel like I've learned so many other methods of dealing with it just from being forced to have to deal with it that I don't feel the need to rely on medication. I will take medication every now and then, but it's not a regular thing for me. And on top of that, neither of my parents went to college. That was not something that they knew anything about. A lot of times growing up, I would talk about these schools that I would want to go to, and though it wasn't intentional, it would kind of be shot down because, well, how are we going to pay for it? Oh, well, you're going to pay for that school. How are we going to do that? Like that was the thing. It was. I would always be told by my parents, "Oh, you're smart. You'll be able to go to college," but I wasn't from a well-to-do family because of the ADD issues and my struggles with homework. My grades weren't top tier, and I was kind of passed over by the school system. I was never pushed hard. I was never pushed to like apply for scholarships or anything like that. I thought scholarships were just if you were good at sports. And I did do a semester of community college immediately after graduating. I'd also moved out on my own then, but I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to manage money. I didn't know how to navigate the school system. I had done FAFSA and I got a big sum of money. And for someone who's never had any spending money and never had any training on how to spend or save or do any of that, I just see money come to me. And all these things that I've wanted for so long, I have right now access to getting them. So I did spend irresponsibly and didn't do well. Ended up, I was given too much financial aid and I had to pay stuff back. It was a long road, but took a while. I'm here in a better position now and glad to be here. As far as emotional labor goes, it's not as talked about or viewed as the same as physical labor. Whenever we think labor, we tend to think physical labor, lifting heavy things, doing hard, back-breaking tasks. But there's the aspect of labor that requires you to be something that you're not, to be happy when you're not happy, to appear friendly when you feel like not that. And it's exhausting to do that. I mean, anyone who has had any experience, I've worked retail jobs where I had to be fast, fun, and friendly. I worked at Target for 3 years from like 2011 to 2014. Fast, fun, and friendly was a slogan that they used, and it's still kind of ingrained in my head. But no matter what you had going on, you drop that at the door and you exist solely to serve the guests. That's another thing at Target. They're not customers, they're guests. And I mean, it's an exhausting thing. It tends to be more of a thing with feminine jobs than masculine jobs. Men tend to be viewed as more suited for the physical labor. And I believe that alone. There is definitely, now whether it's intentional or not is one question, and whether it matters if it's intentional or not is another question. But there is a tendency to minimize the feminine in order to promote and buoy up the masculine. As far as the glass ceiling, the glass escalator, and the sticky floor goes, I have experienced the glass escalator and the sticky floor. I have not experienced the glass ceiling, but the glass ceiling is this invisible barrier that it's viewed as an invisible barrier. I'm going through this kind of change now where instead of viewing things as structures, I'm viewing them more as praxis. The structure seems kind of divorced from the human and like this thing outside of us, whereas whenever it's viewed as practice, it is made imminent to us. And so I would say the glass ceiling can be viewed as a structure, as a like physical type of barrier. You can use that metaphor. I would say though that it's more institutionalized practice, strategy or method, where women just there's a hard cap on where they can go. That doesn't apply to men. Glass escalator is the opposite. If a man is in a traditionally feminine field, the man tends to rise to higher pay grades and promotions faster than women do, and they're seen as more qualified, more competent. They're encouraged to be more aggressive, and with that aggression and assertiveness comes demanding more or expecting to get more and not being afraid to ask for more. And that type of behavior is encouraged within men and discouraged within women. And this goes back into the practice that I'm talking about. It's not this invisible structure. It is how we are taught to behave and reproducing these practices that reproduce these phenomena. I apologize. And then the sticky floor is another thing that I've experienced and my family experienced, and millions upon millions have experienced. And it is the fact that when you're in low paying jobs, you tend to stay in low paying jobs. It becomes hard to get out of these situations. There are a lot more low paying jobs than there are high paying jobs, which means the chances of getting promoted are lower because it's a much bigger pool that you're in. You don't have the money to pursue education necessarily. You're so focused on paycheck to paycheck living. There are numerous factors that could contribute to it, but it is a sticky floor. You can't pull yourself off of the floor. You're stuck in this same cycle. As far as the wage gap goes, there are three things that, if you read the text, well, there are three things that I've identified in the text as contributing to it. One is the fact that jobs are gendered. There's a joke that I've heard, I'm sure you've all heard it, about the way to explain the wage gap is it's simple. It's that men choose high paying jobs like doctor or lawyer, and women choose lower paying jobs like female lawyer or female doctor. And it does kind of expose a lot of what's going on. I mean, that isn't necessarily sticking with the gendered jobs thing, but it shows that the labor is valued lower for women. But you think of medical professionals. Men tend to be the doctor, women tend to be the nurse. Men are paid higher than women. Women are typically seen as being more in service roles. You also have the idea of the ladder of success. There are less doctors than there are nurses. So when it comes to promotions, there are fewer doctors to pick from than there are nurses to pick from. So the chances of success are higher within these male gendered jobs than they are in the female gendered jobs. And there's the one that I tend to agree with more, and think that the others are more symptoms of, and that's the argument of power, that this is designed to be this way, that men, specifically white men, want to keep their positions of power, and they have organized society in a way that will allow them to keep their positions of power. Then we have the global system of paid and unpaid work. And this is, off the bat, this is one reason why I hesitate to be in favor of kind of democratic socialism. It makes promises to increase the standard of living and make things better here in the imperial core or the global north, or whatever terminology you want to use, but it does nothing to address or even makes worse conditions outside of home. But it is this system that is built where you have debtor nations and creditor nations, and it's predatory lending as if there were ever any other type of lending under modern capitalist systems, where the debtor nations will never actually get out of debt. And because they can never get out of debt, they can never invest in themselves. They're exploited. Their labor is cheap, but it's made to be cheap because they're put in a position where they don't own any resources themselves, so they have to go through this process. But there have been a couple approaches to this. There's the WID, or Women in Development, which claims that, and I'm going to be critical of some of these. It's just how I am and my views on it, and it's going to be oversimplified, but I believe I'll get to the gist of it. But for WID, Women in Development, the core of it is that the global South should model themselves off of the global North. This is based on a couple assumptions. One, that the global North is the way to do things, which is in no way something that should just be assumed. It's not a given. And that the system can function with every country operating as if it's in the global North, which I don't believe it can. I believe the system very much needs oppressed nations to continue function. The only reason that the global North can be so rich is because it exploits and impoverishes the global South. The only reason the rich here can be rich is because it exploits and impoverishes the lower classes here. Now, the lower classes here have it far better than the lower classes elsewhere. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's the same principle at play. Then you have Women and Development, which critiqued WID for, I mean, some of the things that I stated, and brought to light the fact that there's a lot of unpaid labor that women do, which is a huge problem everywhere. Women are expected to reproduce laborers for free. Women are expected. It's almost it's almost a feudalist relation of production if you examine like traditional gender roles, where the man works and earns a living and um pays for the rent and provides, and it puts the women in a position almost like serfdom, where because the man provides, the man is the lord, the woman is expected to pay corvée in the form of reproductive labor and housework and all of this unpaid stuff. And Women in Development tries to bring light to that, shed light on it, say, hey, we should pay the women for this labor, because I believe the figure was like 66% of working hours are done by women. It's just they aren't paid for the vast majority of their working hours. And it does add in some critique of capitalism, say, hey, maybe this might not be the best system, or maybe we should try to temper some of the more negative effects of capitalism. Then you have GAD, which is Gender and Development, which really introduces intersectionalism into the approach and says that women aren't homogenous and we need to kind of take into account the intersection of all of their different identities and how the oppression might be experienced differently. I also feel like it would be more open to trans and non-binary identities. It also incorporates kind of a critique of masculinity and how masculinity and how I view it is masculinity and femininity are oppositional and exclusive. So they are defined by not being the other. And whatever the masculine is defines what the feminine is and vice versa, which also could explain why masculinity is so fragile. It's inherently fragile because any ground that the feminine gains is ground that the masculine has lost. I say we blow the whole thing up, but so yeah, it's I would say that Gender and Development, it's a more radical approach than the others, but I'm not even going to hide it. I believe any movement, any theory or praxis that will effectively address this also has to tackle capitalism. I believe capitalism is at the root, and I mean even some of the assumptions in capitalism that go deeper than capitalism itself, the enabling factors of this way of thinking and relating and living. And then you have WCD, Women, Culture, and Development. This is probably the biggest oversimplification, but from my reading of it, it really just kind of injects idealism into it, in that it says, well, no, we need to think about cultures and how these ideas and beliefs affect it, and not just the economy, but I'm of the belief that the economy itself plays a determining role in the culture and the ideas. The economy is what brings people together and generates the relations that they have with each other, how they physically relate to each other, which would then be the conditions for the beliefs to emerge of how they think of each other. Um, so, yeah, I do believe that at its core, I believe in materialism. I'm very much a materialist. And so I don't believe that women culture and development is necessarily the right approach. I believe it can put too much emphasis on the ideal aspect. And as someone who's studied a lot of ideology critique or things that would fall into that kind of broad category, I think that's enough of a cautionary tale for what focusing on the idealism, or for a cautionary tale for how focusing on idealism too much can play out, in that it's not that effective. It's not about believing these things, it's about doing these things and continuing the practice over and over. And we need to change that and not worry as much about the belief, because the belief blossoms from the praxis. So, yeah, thank you very much.